into it, does everybody here know what that little robot is in the middle? If you do, put up your hand. Only a few people? Cool. I'm going to teach you about that little robot tonight. So my name is Brian. I'm going to talk to you guys about device APIs, which I think are the kind of next thing beyond HTML5. I'm also going to talk to you a little bit about HTML5, but that's okay. And I'm a huge fan of Courage Wolf. And this has kind of become my mantra as a software developer, because there is just so much shit to chew on when you're a software developer, especially today. And the Courage Wolf is kind of like the internet's answer to the motivational speaker. And who here has heard of the Courage Wolf? Most of you have. If you have not, then you got to look it up. It's all right. He's going to make an appearance again later. The Courage Wolf basically tells you what you can't do, and you're going to do it. So we're going to talk about APIs and how they work. And before we get into how APIs work, we should probably talk about how APIs became what APIs are. So if we go back in time and think about communication and telecommunications, it sort of started with the telegraph. Before that, we obviously was language and we'd speak to each other, but that was coarse and it didn't work really well. And the only time we had really distant communication was semaphore. And that was good for about 30 miles over the distance of a horizon where you could flash a light. And through that came Morse code, and then beyond that came the telegraph, where we could actually transmit a message over great distances. And this had huge military importance, and it had huge psychological importance, because all of a sudden we could change how people thought over huge distances. Before that, if you didn't have a really fast horse and the ability to read and write, you were fucked. You didn't know anything. You only knew what your neighbor knew. And that's interesting. So this particular device was like a much later version of a telegraph. Earlier, they were just those little tappy guys. And it's interesting to think that this thing is not even 200 years old. You know, this is very recent times, and so we've come a long way. Beyond the telegraph, there was the telephone. Alexander Graham Bell was credited with inventing it, which is bullshit. He didn't, but he won the patent. And if you go to Wikipedia, you can read about this. It's really interesting because a whole bunch of people actually came up with the idea of a telephone at the exact same time. And this is really common in history. It's not unique to have an idea. It's unique to implement an idea. And Alexander Graham Bell won the patent, so we give him credit for actually inventing it. But he probably didn't. There was a lot of guys that did. And his telephone actually kind of sucked, but that doesn't matter. No one cares and no one remembers it. His legacy lives today in his name and in AT&T. After the telephone, we had the radio. And the radio was really cool because this was true hacker culture. The original radio was completely open, unregulated. It was very indie. There were small towers that people could connect to all over the place. Not even towers, it was just individuals. And it could be anything. It could be comedy, it could be music, it could be somebody talking. And so radio was awesome for a time. And then after World War I, it became really apparent that radio was a huge opportunity for communication between governments and their military. And it became regulated. And as a result, I think RCA was created, Radio Corporation of America, and they regulated the living shit out of it. You can't own a radio or create a radio unless you go through channels that are controlled by the government, essentially. That radio was the first RCA radio. So that's interesting. And then there's motion pictures. And motion pictures were another area that was fraught with a lot of different inventors at the same time. And no one really could nail down who created it, but Edison took a whole bunch of early credit for it. If you look at this awesome picture, there's an orchestra in front because they didn't figure out how to synchronize audio at the same time. This is barely 100 years ago, which is super fascinating in current thinking. Because then we move to television, which comes next. And this dude, this British dude, I can't remember his name, but he's one of the creators of television. There was more than one at the same time. And some of the earliest televisions weren't even at all electronic. They were completely analog. That little crystal circle in the middle there is the television itself. And it would play about 20 seconds or something like that. What an amazing thing to have happen. And that kind of like brings us to today. where now we can share any information at any time, anywhere that we want. And it isn't just over computers. It happens to be through our phones. And that's sort of what this whole talk's about. This is the significance of device APIs. And we're within like the last 200 years, we can now see a time where communicating has become effectively zero. So web technology is changing really fast. And everybody here knows that. If you're at the HTML5 meetup, it's not news. I work on the PhoneGap project. I've also done other things that I'm not super proud of, and things that I am proud of. WTFJS, XUI, Launcher. You can check out my Twitter, whatever. So we're going to go through HTML5 very quickly, and I'm sure this audience is super familiar with it, but there might be things you're not. It's worth talking about. And then we're going to go through device APIs, which I feel are the kind of next generation of APIs. And then we're going to talk about what's fucked up about device APIs, because there's a lot of that too. And that's why it's not here yet. So HTML5. Can I get a cheer of some form? You're here. It's like Thursday night. You might as well be stoked you're here. So I'm from Canada, and this is our HTML5 coat of arms. And this is one thing I totally do not understand. So I recently moved to the United States, and I fucking don't get this. Someone will be like, oh, hey, nice to meet you, Brian. Yeah, you work with the PhoneGap team? And they'll be like, yeah. And they're like, are you Canadian? I'll be like, yes. And then they'll laugh at me. Why do you guys do that? I don't understand what's wrong with our moose's arms here. Anyways, so it's anatomically correct, but it looks super awkward. He's feeling all bummed. The bear's coming for him. The beaver doesn't give a shit. Anyways, so HTML5 has kind of come to mean nothing, I think. I think the message has gotten watered down. And so very quickly, just to like roll it around, HTML5 came out around 2004 through an initiative with the WHAT Working Group, so the Web Application Technology Working Group. These guys, basically browser vendors, got together and they said, okay, XHTML is going nowhere. And it's going nowhere super fast. And we have to also keep in mind what happened before. And HTML5 was a result of that. HTML5 actually didn't get any major adoption until Steve Jobs wrote a letter about some other technology to some other big company. And after that letter, a lot of people decided that HTML5 was the way to go. So HTML5 is kind of two parts. It's markup and it's APIs, and so there's a declarative side to it. XHTML is still cool. You can do that if you want to do that. But you don't have to do that. And unless you're a Java programmer, you probably don't want to do that. So you can still write crappy markup without any quotes, and frankly, I do too. We now have a standardized parsing algorithm, so there's one way to parse HTML5, which means that we get to have the same bugs across browsers. There's a bunch of new elements. There's structural elements. There's text level elements. Oh, the time thing, that was funny. There's some form elements, which are actually really useful. And then there's embedding elements, which are really interesting to me personally. Canvas element lets us paint pixels. Video and audio elements, in theory, would allow cross-platform video and audio. And then there's a new input type, which I love how the W3C is all about semantics. So they have a type equals, which makes no sense. But so you get all these different types, which are actually implemented in mobile really well. There's a bunch of programmatic APIs we can drag and drop. There's web workers, which give us a kind of analog to threading, server-sent events, sockets, cross-document messaging. You guys are probably familiar with this stuff. Offline happens, just like shit. And we've got the Navigator Offline API, which I think is horrendous. There's a talk. It will be available really soon. It's by a guy named Jake Archibald. His whole thesis was that the app cache is a douchebag at JSConf, and he presents it very well. That link will take you there, and I'll share that link after. Web storage is a nightmare. I've created a library called Launcher, which helps. WebSQL is going away. WebSQL seemed like a good idea. Who likes writing SQL statements as a giant string? Nobody. So that's on its way out. IndexedDB is on its way in, which is basically the idea that we can store JSON objects. And then there's various file APIs. I think there's something like 6 or 7 different standards for that. Cool. So HTML means new, shiny. We get more expressive tools. And rich content's first class. Offline web is still nascent but feasible. As the Courage Wolf would say, die as you were born, screaming, bathed in blood. OK, so device APIs. That's what we're here to really talk about. So this is about going beyond HTML5. You guys got the background. You already know what it's all about. Device APIs, I would classify them as headless. And so they're not things that you can look at. They're not things you can see. When we were developing PhoneGap early on, we decided that the UI was something the web did really well. There's probably a lot of debate to be had about whether or not that's true. But if you think about it, the web, when it comes to a lot of different screen sizes, and a lot of different dimensions, and a lot of different devices, it's scaled fairly well. Device APIs were the real problem to us. Ultimately, we felt that we didn't have access to the things that the native platforms had access to that we wanted to make a real difference. And phones are particularly interesting because they have a whole lot more sensors than a typical computer. So we divide them up into 3 buckets. Sensors, data, and outputs. And so sensors are like geolocation, accelerometer, or GPS accelerometer, your camera, that kind of thing. Data would be things like your contacts, your file system, your media itself, like your songs, your movies, that kind of thing. And outputs would be things like your screen, your microphone, or sorry, your speakers, that sort of thing. So those things are truly cross-platform. If you think about any phone you have or any device you've got, they've got those things, and those things don't necessarily require UI, although they may. And so that's what device APIs are all about. So we're not the only ones that thought about this stuff. And in fact, there were a lot of people thinking about it long before the PhoneGap team was. There's a group in Europe called the WHATWG, which I think is aptly named. It stands for Wholesale Application Community. The WHATWG defined a lot of stuff around device APIs before they were realized. And the WHATWG is basically a consortium of carriers in Europe. Formerly, they were called Bondi. And a lot of those guys make up the current DAP at the W3C. W3C DAP was formed in 2009, a year after PhoneGap came about. The DAP stands for Device API Working Group. DAP is really similar to, their goals are very similar to ours. And the widget working group is actually quite similar to us too. Mozilla recently got involved. Do we have anyone from Mozilla here? Not one person from Mozilla at the HTML5 meetup? Weak sauce. All right. That's fine. So Mozilla recently, has anyone here heard of Boot2Gecko? All right, yeah. A little over half the room. A lot of people lying that haven't heard of it. That's fine. So Boot2Gecko is Mozilla's initiative to build an operating system for phones. And they've recently gotten involved, and they said, yeah, we like all these APIs, but they suck. So we're going to do our own thing, create our own little group, and then we're going to contribute it back. And that's basically Web API, and they're totally right. It needs to be done this way. They're implementing first as opposed to standardizing by committee first. Web API is interesting. I'll show you some stuff from there, too. And then finally, there's Apache Cordova, which is PhoneGap, and that's whom I represent. The PhoneGap project started off, and we really didn't know what we were doing. We were just doing some stuff. And we thought it would be cool if phones could, have a web browser that was as capable as the actual native platform that it was running on. When Steve Jobs announced the original iPhone, he said it was all about the web. He said the web is the platform. And everyone went, no, man, we want to write Objective-C. And which they didn't, but they thought they did. And so then they got their SDK, and everyone's like, oh, this sucks, but whatever. So we created PhoneGap just to address that. We wanted the web to be the platform, too. That was the idea. And so all these groups believe in this same idea, where the web is a platform, but what that platform is going to be is what we need to figure out. There's a related concept to device APIs that I want you to be aware of, and this isn't actually important for you to know. And this is just something that you need to know. It's something to put in the back of your head and then forget maybe really quickly. So carriers. The common carrier. The carriers are your friend. They are the people that you pay money to have access to the internet. And they're creating APIs now too. Carrier APIs are typically limited to that carrier. And they're typically around billing, messaging, and location services. So there's a group related to the WHAC that's working on this. And the WHAC is working on this too. But also the carriers are spinning off their own APIs. And so they have billing APIs where you can imagine if you, a good example, Verizon recently launched an app store. And if you build an app for Verizon's Android app store, you can rely on their carrier APIs to do in-app purchase billing on Android, on Verizon only. So if you do that, you get the privilege to pay them 30% of your profit. And the bill will show up on someone's credit card. Along with their phone bill. So there's carrier APIs, they exist. They also have messaging APIs, so you can direct message people, which may or may not be useful. If you're only targeting a particular market with a particular carrier, this might make sense. Let's face it, it's generally a duopoly in any given country, so carrier APIs could make sense. And then finally, location services is another angle. So your carrier not only knows where you are, they're willing to sell that information to developers. Good news. Okay, so installable web apps is another concept that's worth knowing about. This one gets shit on sometimes. People don't like it. I don't love it either. I think it's a bit of a bummer term. It's a term worth knowing. It's definitely related to device APIs. How it works is pretty simple. It suggests the idea that there's a distribution model. It suggests that the API, or that the app is installed on the phone. So it's not being hosted. It's not living on a server. It lives on the device. And it suggests a security runtime model. W3C widgets tried to address this. It does in some forms. There's a permissions element on a config XML, which is a part of this. Chrome Web Store also tries to address this. It has its own config JSON. Mozilla Web Apps actually don't live on device. They live through the cache manifest on device, but they have an analog to this. And then finally, PhoneGap Build, if you think about it, might be the idea of installable web apps. So PhoneGap Build is a cloud-based service that we have for PhoneGap, which I'll show you more later. So installable web apps, keep that in mind. It's the idea that the website runs on the phone. OK, here's our first API. You've probably seen it before, but you haven't seen it written like this. So the W3C doesn't want to hang everything off Window and Navigator, so they created a geolocation namespace, thank God. And there's some interesting stuff going on here. So they've got their own namespace, sweet. And then they ask, get current position. And it's almost like a question. It's saying, get current position if you can, because it invites the user to have a modal dialog that says, do you mind if this web page knows where you are? And then there's a success and a failure callback. But I don't like typing, so I always call it win and fail. And I'm totally on the comma first bandwagon, so there you go. And that's our app. Pretty simple stuff. PhoneGap implemented this after Google Gears, but we were the first before any browser. Now this is generally available. And that's a really cool thing. Spatial services aren't the only thing that's coming in device APIs. We're seeing now the vibration API. So PhoneGap has a vibration API. In the first example, we're going to vibrate for 1,000 milliseconds or 1 second. In the second example, we're going to do the exact same thing. In the third example, we're going to kind of pulse. It'll vibrate for a second. It'll vibrate. It'll go off. It'll vibrate for half a second. Then it'll vibrate for 2 seconds. My gratuitous slide about vibration APIs, you were all thinking it anyways, so it doesn't matter. What are you going to do with a vibration API? This is the part where I tell a story about a guy named Rob Ellis. So Rob, who I hope is watching, when we first created PhoneGap, this was one of our earliest APIs. And it's not because we're perverts, it's because it made sense. And it was a simple API to create. And then we thought, well, what could you do with a vibration API besides the obvious? And we were trying to think of something cool. He's like, I know. We could create this game because we already had the accelerometer working. We could create this game where you got to shake your phone, and the longer you shake it, you'll know if you're leveling up, it'll vibrate, like what level you're on. So if you're on like level 10, it'll vibrate 10 times. And so So you can imagine what that game looked like. It never made it into the App Store. So there's a bunch of geospatial APIs available now. Accelerometer, gyroscope, magnometer. I always think these things sound like superheroes, or possibly like superhero abilities. They're just geospatial APIs. They let us know where we're at. And so Apple kind of forced their hand on this. There was a whole bunch of different standards, and then Apple came out with their own. But generally, this is what you're looking at if you're going to implement anything that's using device motion. Pretty simple. Acceleration, including gravity, really does read a lot like Objective-C, which is fine. So this is where stuff gets interesting. Those are kind of boring APIs. Those things don't really manifest in our user interface. They have huge impact socially, but whatever. So now you have a web browser, and it knows where you are, where you're moving, your rate of change, possibly even what floor of the building you're on. No big deal. Also turns out your browser really soon is going to be able to turn on your camera and look at you, or straight out the front. So media sensors or the media capture or the media streaming APIs are brand new business. And this stuff is super cool. So there's two sides to it. There's a declarative side and there's a programmatic side. A declarative side is actually fairly well realized. You can use this stuff today in a bunch of different browsers. You essentially say input type file, I want images. It's going to invoke the camera application on your phone. This is awesome because there's actually an implicit permission here. The file API, or input type equals file, was like our earliest kind of inkling into what a permissive API might look like. And this is a really big deal to think about as developers, because if we're letting the browser access our location and our cameras and then possibly our contacts and our file system, there's going to have to be some kind of runtime security model. And we have to think about how that stuff will work. Declaratively, if we declare, hey, here's an input, and when this person clicks it, then we're going to ask them, do you have a question?
I have a question about,
yeah?
Because it's on type file and iOS, on mobile disables the file type. Is that, because I know this works on Chrome.
It'll work on Chrome for sure.
It works on Chrome 20 right now, but on iOS, will it ever work since they disable the file input type?
I can't speak for Apple. I have no idea. But oh, so the question was, will this ever work on iOS in the browser?
Because of the disabled file type.
I imagine eventually it will. It'll work in PhoneGap through the programmatic API. I can't speak for Apple. I don't know what they're doing with their browser. Why don't we save the questions for later? Well, okay, give it, man. All right, do it. Do it. All right, but can someone grab me a beer if this guy's going to ask me a question? That's my tax. I'm parched.
So I was checking out the WebRTC,
Oh, man, you're killing my presentation here. Just let me get to it. I'm going to talk about it. D-Shaw. All right, so moving on. Input type file. Implicit security model, you can get at any device that's on your, whatever, your runtime environment. So there has to be a programmatic analog to this. We can't just have a declarative analog or a declarative API because we're going to want to get at the actual pixels that are being captured. And it's going to be through a streaming API. And this is fascinating shit. So right now, there's a lot of people pissed because there's a -WebKit prefix in CSS. And people are pissed because there are a lot of other browsers than WebKit on the mobile web, which is fine. The developers are only focusing on WebKit. Because they're only focusing on WebKit, we're seeing a proliferation of sites that have a substandard experience for mobile on alternate browsers on different operating systems. And so if you visit a site, like pretty much any site in Fennec, which is Firefox's mobile browser for Android, is going to look like shit, even though they implement a lot of APIs that you'll see in mobile Safari. It's the same story for Opera. And so Opera just recently decided to draw a line in the sand and fuck it. They started implementing -WebKit prefix on CSS. And so this has divided the community. Obviously, this is a problem. It's a huge problem because it's not fair to Opera and it's not fair to Mozilla and it's not fair to the open web that developers are choosing to implement against a particular browser when the idea of these beta features is that they're for testing. And so whether it's right or wrong, I'm not here to debate. All I want to point out is now that shit's coming to JavaScript. so yeah, so, and it's going to get real. And so I don't know what the answer is. I really don't. I'm just here to point it out. And so get user media, the idea, this is kind of like the programmatic API. This is where it's evolved to. In order for it to be vetted completely, everyone's implementing a different way to do it. And they've now brought vendor prefixing into the world of JavaScript. Sweet. So you're going to see code that looks like that more and more, for sure. Rick Waldron wrote a little library, which is completely worth checking out. This is a gist of it. And really, I just linked to like the main part. So I went in, and I really wanted to try out Get User Media on my laptop and check it out. And so I spent the better part of the day playing with it. And I can assure you it is not ready for prime time. But it does work. It does kind of work anyways. I'm going to go to Chrome Canary. So if you go to About Flags in Chrome, so first of all, do you write front-end code? Put up your hand. Every fucking buddy here writes front-end code. Do you have Chrome Canary installed? Everyone without your hand, what the fuck? Install Chrome Canary, because there is a lot of cool shit to do here. So if you go into Chrome Canary, you can enable or disable a whole bunch of shit. Media streaming is what I'm interested in. If I could spell. Enable media, encrypt media. No. Enable media stream. So this is the bad boy. So you go About Flags in Chrome Canary or Chrome Dev Channel. Chrome Canary is where it's at, though. And then if you go to West Coast Logic Hacks Media Capture, in theory, I would see myself right now. Oh, I got to restart Chrome. Good call. Fail. Oh, no. I failed twice. I had to start my screen recording again. All right. Chrome Canary. Let's close down 4chan. Go to the media capture stuff. No, man. Why are you bummed? This is the demo gods getting angry. Really? This worked like 10 minutes ago. It was a way cooler demo when it worked. All right, so if you have, by any chance, if you have Chrome Canary and you go to that web page, there's a pretty good chance it'll kick up your camera. The whole Canary build? Oh, both of them, you mean? Maybe.
Maybe you should just stop recording. Maybe it's just keeping your camera busy.
That could be it. That could be it. Yeah. Do I blame QuickTime? I'm not going to blame... all right, so listen. We're not going to waste our time with this. There's other shit for me to show you. You should have seen, well, I'll show you what you'll see. So you should have seen, I bet you it is QuickTime, man. Now I'm all like suspicious. I am debugging. There's no error. What should I do? This is like mobile software development at its best. I have no idea what is wrong.
But you have beer.
Why does he drink so much? Yeah. Oh, God. He's Canadian. Okay, so what you should see, there's a video element right here, which you can see being highlighted as I drip beer everywhere. And then I've included a little mini shim, which is not the problem. And then we're going to call navigator get user media. We're going to say, give me the audio and the video. It should turn the camera on immediately and begin streaming it into that video element. And that's really it when it works. All right, so yeah, we have vendor prefixing now infecting JavaScript. Sweet. And we have the beginnings of the media capture API, which I'm sad that demo didn't work, but that's OK. So we're stoked on media capture because we actually got to start prototyping that stuff a couple of years ago on the PhoneGap project. I'm going to show you some code there too, which will probably fail abjectly, but that's fine. WebRTC is sort of the new hotness, and the idea behind WebRTC is real-time streaming video and audio through a web API. This stuff is definitely going to be a big deal. You'll be able to implement your own chat server in basic markup. There's other APIs that are worth knowing about. Connection API kind of met its early life on PhoneGap. So first of all, what the fuck? Like, really? Who thought that was a good idea? Capital L? Some Java guy. I'm certain of it. Anyways, so that right now we can check Navigator Online, and we're going to get a Boolean. And it may be wrong, but that's fine. Because you can be connected to a network, but not necessarily be doing anything on that network. And this is a lesson we learned in the PhoneGap project. So we created all these awesome network states that we can introspect through the native APIs on all these different platforms. So not only can we tell if you're online, we can tell if you're on Wi-Fi or if you're on 3G or edge connection. This is really useful in content negotiation. If you're dealing with a video type of implementation where you need like either high quality or low quality, you can choose how to negotiate that content based on the connection type. Only problem is, and this wasn't actually a problem in Canada, it was a problem here in the United States, in particular with AT&T, we realized that carriers lie. Feel like you're on 3G, 2 kilobytes an hour. So the carrier connection isn't the way to introspect this. We need to actually do a round trip of our own and ascertain how many kilobytes per second are actually flying along the wire. So this API will change, but this API is in kind of prototype phase in the DApp, and it's in PhoneGap today, but we've realized its shortcoming. It's good to know if you're online or offline, but it's pretty much useless if you're online and you can't transfer any data. And so connection API, that's something you can look forward to. Another one, and I love this story because this one's awesome. Battery API. It's sort of interesting to think about the idea of having the ability to know if a phone's about to die. We can do a whole bunch of stuff. We can back up data. We can prompt the user and say, hey, listen, you're about to go offline. Do this important thing that will save the world. The only problem with the battery API is it drains the battery like a motherfucker. And so you are constantly pulling the battery. It's like, we need a better API for that. So we've got it in PhoneGap, but we look at it and we're just like, this one's just a bad idea altogether. Because if you're pulling the battery, you're using the battery and you're killing cycles using it. So probably better to have a things are about to die event as opposed to a pull constantly event. App lifecycle events. This is something that's only in PhoneGap and is just landing in Chrome. I can't remember what Chrome has, but there's like a tab active, something like that, if a tab is active or not. This is fairly new thinking, but imagine, so in PhoneGap we've got something called device ready. That's when our bridge is available, or the foreign function interface between the code that's native and the code that's not. Once a device is ready, you can think of it as firing like just after DOM content loaded or DOM ready. So you're ready. Then we've got pause and resume. This is when you're either backgrounded or not, which is also interesting and useful, and it's relevant to the desktop context. Sometimes you're on a tab, sometimes you're not. There's no point in wasting processing power if someone's not looking at the pretty animation you're creating. Contacts API is one of our earliest APIs. We were really kind of goaded into doing it. People really wanted contacts in the browser. And it's a powerful idea because your contacts are probably your real social network. The actual social graph lives on your phone, the people you really talk to. I mean, you don't really talk to anybody that's on Twitter or whatever. So we implemented this API. We don't love it. It's got some weird stuff. I love that. There's a typo here, but who cares? So you've got an options object. Why we didn't use an object literal, it's probably because there's something called WebIDL, which is the bane of JavaScript, but whatever. You pass it to your contacts find method. You get a success and callback object, and you can read the contacts off the phone. This exists today in PhoneGap and Boot to Gecko. Powerful idea. File system API. So there's a few. There's the file API, there's file reader API, there's file writer API, and then there's the file system and directory API. I'm not sure why it had to be like that, but that's how it worked out. It's asynchronous, and so you've got a lot of calls that have a lot of callbacks, and so you go through a lot of async ceremony to read and write files. The good news is we can read and write files off the file system. The file reader exists today in Chrome. File writer is yet to happen. PhoneGap has this, and it actually extends it with some other ideas called file transfer, which allows us to broadcast files across the network. So useful stuff. Probably begging for a Unixy wrapper, if anyone here wants to write a micro library. So I've talked a little bit about Boot to Gecko. I actually happen to have one of the phones. We're super bullish on this device. We believe deeply in the idea of WebOS. We're waiting for the day when that shit is open sourced fully. Boot to Gecko is Mozilla's attempt at the same idea. This is a web browser that's first-class operating system. And it introduces what they're calling Web API for now. And Web API tackles all the problems that PhoneGap had and a whole bunch of other ones because they've decided to go for the whole thing. They're doing an entire operating system. They're doing it in the open. So there's things around telephony and SMS, screen orientation, which is an interesting API. Settings, so like you could have settings across different apps. Why not have a unified API for that instead of using local storage? Resource lock, so resource lock is things like if I'm playing a video, I don't want to sleep the screen. Makes sense, and so we might want to allow the browser to do that kind of thing. Power management API, so like literally to be able to control the brightness and the ambient light of the screen. Well, connection API would be the kind of future of the network API. Sensor API could be things like a proximity sensor, so as your phone gets closer to your ear, we'll know it's actually touching your ear, and then a whole bunch of other stuff. So this needs to be checked out, because everyone here is really excited about HTML5, and you should be, because that's exactly what's happening right now. As good technologists, what we really want to know is what's going to happen next. And this is an excellent window to that future. So there's another window. And I'm not here to pitch you. I'm just here to show you this shit. So recently, PhoneGap came into the Apache Software Foundation. And when we joined Apache, they told us that we had to adopt a new name that was agnostic from all of the trademark infringement and problems that we may or may not have. So Apache Cordova is our new name. And Apache Cordova is the open source analog of PhoneGap. And Apache Cordova means nothing different than PhoneGap itself. PhoneGap is a distribution of Apache Cordova. Sometimes people struggle with this idea. It's really simple. There's WebKit, there's Chrome, same shit. So Apache Cordova is the open source realization of PhoneGap. And our whole deal this year has been plugins. We've never fully documented how we implemented PhoneGap itself. And we've just started to document that stuff. PhoneGap 2, we're gunning to release around July 20th. I'm not going to make that full promise, but it's going to happen in that time frame. And when that happens, the plugins API will be fully documented, and anybody will be able to compose a PhoneGap of any device APIs they want. And so today, if you go to docs.phonegap.com, you can see, whoa. Where's the edge? one's up here. So you can see our latest kind of like set of APIs, and they're all device APIs that we care about. Those are just plugins. And so we implement these APIs for every platform. Like we've got the camera API. And you can take pictures using JavaScript. Sweet. Yay, JavaScript. And then there happens to be, a few quirks here and there, platform to platform. Not many. So all of these APIs that we offer run on iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, and to some extent, WebOS, Symbian, Qt. Oh, they also all run now on Windows Phone 7. But we realized really quickly that a lot of people wanted to build their own APIs. And we didn't want to build all the same APIs they wanted to build. And that's why our plugin API is coming out, because we think that there's a whole future of device APIs that we haven't figured out yet. And so we're just going to enable people to do that for themselves. So should we give her a go? Should we give PhoneGap a try? You guys actually want to see some code, probably. OK. So this is Xcode. It's Apple's answer to Eclipse. It's not even funny. It makes me want to cry. So I'm gonna show it to you guys from the beginning. So we're gonna go new project, and you get this. Once you install PhoneGap, you get a nice kind of little dialogue. It's like new Cordova-based application. You get the little Cordova robot. This cute little guy. We can give it a name, like fuck whatever. And I'm going to uncheck automatic reference counting. We'll just do this on the desktop. It'll generate a little project for us. Oh, fuck whatever. We're going to kill this Xcode. So that's all right. The first time we run this guy, oh no. Really? The first time we run this guy, it'll fail. And the reason for that is we use Xcode templates to generate this project. And Apple didn't document Xcode templates. And so, yeah, I can't find the WW folder, which is a huge bummer. But it's OK, because we still generated it. It's on the desktop. We just have to tell it where to find it, which is also to say that I need to find it. There it is. Fuck whatever, WW folder. And so, ironically, when we created PhoneGap, we thought it would be so cool to have a WW folder, because Apache did. And now we're part of Apache, which is kind of cool. So here's a PhoneGap app in its fullest realization. So let's full screen that. If Eclipse could look like iTunes, it would look like this. All right, so this is a WW folder. And this is the one thing that every PhoneGap project shares. They all have a www folder. And it may come as a surprise to you that in that www folder, you put HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. In ours, we got a bunch of comments and a bunch of crap. Then we got an H1. Hey, it's Cordova. Sweet. And so if we run this bad boy, it's going to compile. It's going to kick up an alert and say, hey, it's Cordova. And so we built an app for iPhone in a few seconds, which is pretty cool. This same code's portable to Android, BlackBerry, Windows Phone, WebOS, Symbian, wherever. So yeah, so that's cool, but that's just iPhone. What if we want to get it on a BlackBerry? Say. That might be something worth doing. We can go through the exact same song and dance, and we can kick up an Android emulator, but we've only got an hour, so we can't wait for the Android emulator to start. So I'm instead going to show you on an actual phone It's so true. So it's just such an easy joke. It's like punching a baby in the face. All right, so. Oh no, Chrome Canary. Do not. Chrome Canary's been failing today on remembering my passwords. Don't show my email. All right. Let's go to build.phonegap.com. Let's just pummel the network with 100 tabs of strange pornography and other stuff. Nah. All right, so this is build.phonegap.com. And this is where I get cheesy. I'm like, we put PhoneGap in the cloud. It ain't like that. So here's the thing. You can run PhoneGap yourself on your machine, but you'll have to install 2 operating systems and 8 SDKs, and you're going to have to learn them all. And that isn't my problem. That's totally yours. If you want to deal with that problem in a much more sane fashion, you can use build.phonegap.com, where we put PhoneGap in the cloud. You can give an app any name you want. Who cares? And then, because we're nerds, you can create a Git repo and push to us. You can get us to pull from your Git repo, or you can upload a file if you're so inclined. GitHub.com, Brian Leroux, hello.git. So I've got a hello world on GitHub. And yes, there's an error with iOS. I have to give it signing keys, but I've just queued a whole bunch of servers to compile an app for me. And then once that app is compiled, we'll just go to this one here because it's easier. We give you QR codes to install it on your target device, which is pretty handy. So I've done that, but I didn't do it with that Hello app. I actually did it with a different app. And I was playing with media capture earlier today, and Ghetto Photo Share Client. So I thought $1 billion for an app was a pretty good deal. And so I thought I would build an app for taking pictures. And so this app relies on our camera API, which predates the media capture API. The media capture API kind of came out of this thinking. And the idea is that you can use a camera in a web browser on a phone, not a huge leap. So we'll jump in here. And this is the magical incantation that makes it all happen. This is kind of the thing with async programming. You have to work your way from the bottom back up. And so ultimately what we're going to do is take a fucking picture. To get there, we're going to have to click a button. And so the snap function is going to go, hey, take a picture. And if you succeed in taking that picture, call this upload photo method. And so over here in the upload photo method, we're actually using our file transfer API to go to this horrendously named Heroku app. And I don't know who's working at Heroku, but Deep Flower 8321. So if you go here, we've got this cheesy photo sharing app, and this is where things get risky, because now everyone in this audience has this URL, and yes, if you have an internet-connected device, you too can upload a file. So I can go here, and let's take a look at Brian Leroux's picture folder. Very, very briefly. There's a lot of good stuff in here. I got to be super careful. Actually, that one's good. I don't know if anyone followed the semicolon debate. It works. Okay, you get the idea. So that website works, but then check this out. So I've got this client app that posted. That site, by the way, is also in GitHub. If you go to GitHub, Brian Leroux, Ghetto Photo Share. It's not Ghetto Photo Share client, but Ghetto Photo Share. Like, I haven't touched it in a while. 8 months. That's sad. It's a little tiny Node app. It's got 2 methods. It shows pictures and it uploads pictures. That's all it does. You can see D. Shaw working the keyboard over there. There's some heinous stuff being uploaded to that site right now. So, okay. Whatever you people are doing to my website, I don't want to know. So I took that Ghetto Photo Share app, the client app, and this uses that precursor to the Media Capture API. And actually, anybody here could install this if you can get your camera on that. Not an iOS app, the Android only. You would have to give me your signing keys. I'd have to provision your device because Apple's awesome. So awesome that they do it that way. So where's P2V? Oh, you're going to take a picture? Sorry, man. You going for the Windows phone? No. The iPhone? It won't work unless you give me your signing keys, which I would question the logic of doing. So P2V, where are you? Okay, I want to show you my phone because I've got this. Okay, so there's my photo sharing app on my iPhone, and then if I hit capture image, it calls the snap method, which invokes the camera application, which then I can do something interesting, you guys. It's super not interesting. It's good enough. And then it's going to take its time over the network. Then it tells me image uploaded successfully. Depending on what happened now back in my photo sharing app. There you are. No one else uploaded anything? That's amazing. You didn't see the URL long enough. That's good. Okay, so that's cool. That's just on iOS, though. We should do the same thing for Android, right? Trust me, this is still faster than their emulator. I'm sorry if there's anyone here from Google. It's true, though. Okay. We're not going to do a system update. Not yet. And this guy was called Ghetto Photo Share. EFG. Ghetto. So we'll kick up that app, and it's kind of the same app, same code. And we click our button, and yes, my user interface skills are poor. Fantastic. Took a picture. It claims it uploaded it successfully. We go back to this page, and there it is. So that's cool. I can't believe no one else has uploaded anything. There it is. You have your window. So same sort of like song and dance will work for Windows Phone and BlackBerry. The Media Capture API is not complete on WebOS and Symbian, but that's okay because very few people here except for Ben have a WebOS device. No one's laughing. They're all like, that hurts still. It's going to open source soon, man. Oh, wrong slide deck. Okay, so that's PhoneGap and PhoneGap build. So just a very quick recap for everyone here. We have the ability to turn on the front-facing camera on a device. We can access all the contacts on that device. We can also email them silently. We can back up all your data before battery dies. We can synchronize that data. We know what building you're in, and in fact, we even know what altitude you're at, so we could probably guess what floor you're on and in which direction you're traveling. So there's some challenges in device APIs. Security might be one of them. Big part of freedom is privacy. And there's also permission. So we might want to allow people to do this stuff, but a modal dialog that says, hey, can I access your location might not be the right way to do it, because once you've said, yes, website, you can access my location this one time, you might not want to let them do it more than once, or you might want to go back and know which websites you've granted. So this is a huge issue for the W3C. There's also capabilities. And so if we're writing an app that depends on the fact that you have a front-facing camera, what if you have a device that doesn't? Or what if you have a device that might have a front-facing camera when something's plugged in, but doesn't at other times? And so you have to be able to negotiate what capabilities a device has, or what drives are available, or whatever. We have to introspect what devices are available at what time. Performance is still a huge problem. We don't want a battery API that drains the battery. Makes sense. And so as the Courage Wolf would say, that which just doesn't kill you is going to die. I think that was like my way of saying that this isn't the end. What we're hoping for is that people will help us work on this problem. For the web to be a first-class platform, there's a long way for us to go. The web versus native debate is silly. It's not whether or not the web can do something. It's just whether or not we want to get to it. And these problems can be solved. PhoneGap gives us a platform to prototype it. So does Boot2Gecko. So does WebOS. So yeah. There's a lot of stuff to be done, and we need help.